Jillian Rigert, welcome to the Lean Out podcast. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Don. I'm so stoked to be here.
Yeah, me too. So, you have made many pivots in your career, and I know there's a long story behind this, so I'm just going to jump right in and ask you about it. Tell us about your current work-life balance and the journey that got you to where you are today.
Yeah, well, I'm very dedicated to living a life, like you said, it's leaned out. It's very much focused on what matters most to me. So I'm currently in marriage and family therapy grad school, and I'll be training to become a marriage and family therapist that works most likely with primarily with patients with cancer, also healthcare professionals. As we know, we are loaded with a lot of things that can be traumatizing without the space to process through that. So I've really learned what's important to me through my original career. I was fast tracking to become an Air Force oral surgeon. And when I was in residency, I got to the top of that mountain and I thought I'll be content, I'll be happy, I'll be so proud of myself when I'm here. And when I felt more and more empty, I just was questioning what's really going on here. Why don't I feel more worthy? Why do I feel more empty? And along our journeys, we tend to get more and more isolated. So I was observing, because in oral surgery, I was in a 6-year program. So I was with the medical students, and I observed that from the second to third year in medical school, a lot of the medical students were really struggling with their mental health. And what I was observing, and maybe a part of a projection because I was experiencing it, was like they went from being in a class with a whole bunch of people that they could relate to and really having predictability in the content that they were going to be tested on, to then going on to the wards where they're isolated, they're not treated often very well, they feel like they don't matter. And we all know humans are not textbooks in terms of talking to patients and what they're going through. So there was this shift and this unease that I had witnessed, that I had also been experiencing in my life. And I didn't have the tools to cope with it. So I ended up falling into medical compromise with anorexia, which was helping to numb me out, but got so severe that I almost died from it and ended up going inpatient. And they couldn't keep me because my heart rate was too low. So I sat there with no one and a lot of fear, knowing after going through med school, actually, they don't teach many people about eating disorders. So there was no one around that I felt I could trust that knew more about my condition than myself. Not to say that in an egotistical type of way, but there was nobody with medical training specifically for eating disorders. So they were looking at my heart rate, which was in the 20s, and they were just freaking out. And that's not the best, because in medicine, if you don't know what to do, sometimes people will abandon you. And it gave me the opportunity to sit there and experience the loneliness and to reflect on what I would have regretted if I would have died in that moment. And I thought to myself, none of my credentials are here. None of my diplomas are here. All the people I pushed away in order to obtain them are out of my life, now married and moved on. Here I am sitting with this loneliness without the comfort of anything that truly matters in my life. And that was my own doing because I subscribed to what society told me was going to give me worth and value. So that was in 2016. And now we're here in 2025. Since that time, I've really just been peeling back layer by layer by layer by layer. I ended up losing my ex-boyfriend who passed away shortly after that hospital visit. My co-resident passed away and my commander passed away. And you just witness life being too short. And because that can be a painful observation, it's easy to throw yourself into more work. And eventually I cycled over and over and over again to almost dying from anorexia. And eventually I had to choose something other than what I had been doing. So that led me to the concept of lean out and really prioritizing. I would say it's the minimal stuff, meaning that we can't focus on 100 things and optimize our time with them. So I like to say that I maximize life by minimizing the noise.
Mm. I like that terminology, and it reminds me of Greg McEwen's essentialism.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with that work. I have so many thoughts and questions. Getting to this point where you are today, it took leaving a really celebrated and decorated type of a career path.
Mhm.
So let's go back to that time when you decided, I need to quit this path. I need to do something different. How did that look for you? How did you navigate it?
I was so lonely and I was so full of guilt and shame. I was suicidal because my worth was wrapped up into that career. And I had survivor's guilt because I wanted to die and the people I thought had vigor for life passed away and I was still there. It was really, really painful. And I had just enough people in my life, doctors in particular, some doctors that told me about their career pivots and their suicidality. And I heard their story. And this is why I share my story quite regularly, because hearing their story gave me hope. It felt seen. And I sat with the guilt and shame. So I got medically discharged from the military for seeking mental health support, which was a huge hit to my ego. And I loved the military. So I was losing that identity. I had believed that I needed to become a surgeon in order to prove my worth. So without that, once I left that career, I thought there was no way I'd ever obtain worthiness. I ended up switching into oral medicine, which is another specialty of dentistry, which was a very supportive group. So the people there were very supportive in helping me navigate life questions. It straddles dentistry and medicine, and that's where I found my very strong passion for supporting patients with head and neck cancer. I could relate to them, but in a way that wasn't overly identifying with what they were going through. Our experiences face some similar things like the demoralization, and now you have this catalytic event. They have often experienced body dysmorphia and body image distress, which I did with my eating disorder. They're often abandoned or feel like life isn't worth living because the distress of their condition is so high and it impacts the family system, which is ultimately all of that led me to focus on head and neck cancer. I became an attending focus on head and neck cancer. And then I went back to become a research fellow in radiation oncology and head and neck cancer. And so that gave me enough meaning in my life to get me going because I was like, oh, I can improve their patients' quality of life, help them not only survive, but also want to live. And that same sort of philosophy was helping myself, but then I also became a coach for physicians. I value the opportunity to support people with these existential and spiritual crises. It's not just burnout, it's the moral injury. We often develop PTSD from not having time to process the trauma, and then also supporting people during transitions. And I that became meaningful for me because of that pain of the loneliness that I experienced when my whole life felt like it was like the rug was taken out from under me.
I just have to say I'm really glad that you're here and that you got through that such a difficult time in your life. And if there's anything that you could say to someone right now, since we're talking about this heavy topic of not being sure that you want to keep going, what would you say to that person that's in that position?
When I was in that state, and when many people are in that state of despair, it's really hard to think of your options. Deep rest is often what I think about when I think of depressed, and many people I've heard that from other people that
Mm.
we do need rest, but oftentimes we resist giving ourselves permission. And then also, I learned a lot with high achievers that some of our core wounds could be grounded in toxic shame, such that we often believe, and this is a lie, that our brain and toxic shame tells us something that we've been probably taught a lot within our society, within education system, potentially in your family unit, because it's transmissible. Toxic shame often gets handed down from generation to generation. And that's the belief that you need to do something. And you've got on your channel or on your podcast the episode about human being, not human doing. But it's this philosophy that we have to earn our worth and that we're not valuable as we are. And I think ultimately the thing that saved me the most is self-compassion, community who cares about me, not what I do for them, but just as a person, and then offering that to myself. I don't know what anyone, if people are trying to think that their worth is measured by what they did today, I go around thinking everyone's worthy. I have no idea what their day looks like. People don't actually know. And we're so afraid of what other people are thinking about us. But there's the spotlight effect. People really aren't thinking about us as much as we think they are. Sometimes we hope our loved ones think about us more than they do, and that's a different type of relationship. And then also just thinking that our fear of what other people think is often an internal reflection of what we think about ourselves. And that gives us the agency to work on that relationship. And if people do project their feelings or give us feedback that might be hard to hear, then we need to step back and say, one, what's true about this? Or what's a projection of this person's thoughts from their own experiences? Because whatever they say, even the feedback they provide is going to be based off of the values that they have, and say, now what aspect of this feedback do I want to absorb? Or just have like a little bit more space between yourself and your own thoughts and yourself and other people's
Yeah.
actions or words.
So, to come full circle on this discussion about your journey and all the things you've gone through, you're now doing marriage and family therapy, studying to do that as a career. So, what led you away from practicing clinical medicine and going into this other area that is somewhat related but different?
Yeah, I was going to do psychiatry and do psycho-oncology. And I found as a patient that was accepted admission inpatient for anorexia, how I perceive oftentimes our medical model of mental health to go, I felt it just didn't resonate with me. I find high value. There's nothing against psychiatrists, but for me, it didn't resonate because I really felt dehumanized when I was inpatient. I felt it was a very traumatic experience for me. And that created some resistance inside that I would be somebody that would put somebody in that situation. And then getting down to my values, I really wanted to be a person who was well skilled in more of the talk therapy. And there are some psychiatrists that really do develop that skill and value that opportunity to support patients in that way. But I know in our training right now, it's tend to veered more towards the medical management. And I had again, the medicine saved people's lives. For me, it brought me closer to death. It made me feel more suicidal. So I was really nervous about being the person who prescribed meds just because I had that strong reaction to it myself. And so I had to ask myself, what do I really see myself doing, and let that ego go, because it was a lot different training, but also with all the things I went through 5.5 years of residency, and I knew that's a big sacrifice to go back into residency. My life revolves around my dog and giving him the best life. He'll be 7 this year. And I literally calculated, I'm like, he'd be 11 by the time I finish. The one thing I regret the most is not prioritizing the connection with the people and the animals that I loved during my other residencies. And I felt I was going to live out the exact regrets that I've already named in my life if I went back to residency at this time. So marriage and family therapy provided me the outcome that I really see myself doing and the role. And then also the lifestyle during training is a lot more conducive to maintaining my current values and not having to sacrifice those again.
I love that answer. It's so thoughtful, and also it shows that what you are really valuing is what you want to be in most alignment with. And it's not about having a particular degree in a particular field that maybe other people might see as the gold standard for who it is that you're wanting to help. So
Mhm.
I wish you the best in that. And how much longer do you have until you're finished with that schooling?
2.5 years.
Okay, so you're in the thick of it right now.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. We just start our next course this 2 days from now. So yeah.
cool, cool. So you also have a YouTube channel called A Life True to You, and I love the name. And I know that one of the big things that you talk about there is authenticity, and I really want to know what authenticity means to you.
For authenticity, I often found that starting early in my age, I had to abandon parts of myself that I thought were less desirable to be in society, such as being a highly sensitive person, and the values that society leads us to believe are meaningful, such as being a hard worker, self-sacrificer, a good girl, rule follower. I did all those things, and I realized I felt very, very oppressed and silenced. I internalized a lot of my emotions, and then that came out as my life-threatening eating disorder. So I read the book The Way of Integrity by Martha Beck, and she really helped shape my understanding of what was going on. And she showcased that when you live out of alignment with your values, which would not be authentic, would not be in integrity, then it often manifests as illness of the mind, body, and spirit. And so I used her book in order to kind of measure where I was at, and also realizing where the distress was helped me to figure out where my values were not in alignment. In medicine, that came from the challenges of not feeling like we could provide care to all people, which is true. We live in a society where we need money, we need to make money. Not everyone can afford care, and how that impacts the way that we treat people. It was the same in dentistry, where people would come in and they often couldn't afford the care that you would recommend. So you had to give them a less desirable options, which sometimes would lead to worse functioning for them. If you remove teeth and they don't have ways to replace those teeth, for example. So I realized I needed to do something that was community driven, serving as many people as possible who usually get left without resources and who value and appreciate it. So that's different than sometimes if people feel entitled, but yet they don't respect the work. That was challenging for me too. But that led me to want to work in a model that I could provide the care to each individual without having to worry about their insurance or way to pay, which is why one reason why I joined the military. And every step of the way, I think the pain of being out of alignment is what helped me to ask myself, what does authenticity mean? Because it was usually the opposite of that. What are you yearning for? Where's that pain coming from? And what is the need that's unmet right now? One thing I haven't mentioned was so many of us are taught to be self-critical, and that the way to get to what we want in life is to sacrifice ourselves and to beat ourselves down and to work as hard as possible. And if it's not super, super hard, then it's not worth pursuing. And so I leveraged the internalized shame that I already had against myself by really allowing that inner critic to take hold. And so I'm doing a lot of research now on toxic shame and how perfectionism can come as a coping skill to try to not feel that pain of shame, because it's really, really painful. But how that perpetuates shame, because shame is created between the gap of who you think you need to be and the gap of where you perceive you are. So if you think you need to be perfect and you perceive yourself as less than that, you maintain that shame gap. And so nothing I ever was doing to kind of quiet that pain was ever going to be enough. But in those moments that I was sitting on that hospital bed, I thought, oh, I wish I was kinder to myself. Our society is so hyper individualistic right now, and medicine often champions the competitive nature of that because there's limited spots for residency and only select people can be on the top. Uh, so I wish I would have let that go and just really appreciated collaboration, partnership, not feeling so insecure. Like I really now love to be around people who are doing tremendous things, who are way smarter than me in the aspects I want to grow, and also the people who I can help, who maybe need some support where I might be a step ahead. But that's not to say I don't even know if smarter is the right term, but just have more information in that area, more well-developed expertise.
I love that you mentioned community, and I'm wondering where you found community in the most useful ways for you.
Thank you for asking that. One thing with the community is I kept finding it in the wrong places because I kept trying to fit into places where I didn't authentically belong. So I was masking parts of myself, like the highly sensitive person, in order to be who I thought I needed to be. So I was fitting into groups that I just felt like an outsider. And when I was so full of guilt and shame for leaving surgery, I wrote an article on Kevin MD that was called I Risked My Career to Save My Life. And that brought in a community of people who could relate to my story. And that was the starting point of me really finding the people who were going to love me and support me as I was. And that's where I felt the difference between fitting in and belonging, and the community where I feel supported for being who I am and not because of what I do. I was expecting people to have the same internal judgments that I did about myself, that you're worthless for leaving surgery. But the people who actually reached out were people who could relate and they identified with my story. And so then it helped me to find community of people who I truly connected with at like a very deep level and who saw me, and where I felt finally I was starting to feel the difference between fitting in and belonging. And when I was finding people who valued and supported me for who I am as an individual and not for my professional life, that is how I started to open up more and more to finding community support, because then the vulnerability helped me to connect to people in deeper ways and really helped me to feel what I think I was missing my whole life, which was those deeper connections.
I think it's awesome that you had the courage to write that article and wondering, what is going to be the response from this? And yet, in the response, what you got was really what you needed.
Mhm.
So that is a good lesson, I think, for everyone that occasionally, if you're not finding what you need in terms of community, you have to kind of put yourself out there and be honest about what it
Mhm.
is that you're struggling with
Mhm.
and not try to hide it and not try to sugarcoat it or morph it in a way that you think will be accepted by a certain group of people that you're sharing with.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I want to prepare people to just make sure, you're at a place and you're sharing it with people. When I shared it on Kevin MD, sure, that reached an audience that I didn't even know, but I was like, it's such a low point that I thought that risk was worth it. And because that story has continued to feel empowering to share, I've learned that it's not always possible to get the support you need from every audience. So just
Yeah.
being mindful and be mindful of who you share it with and also in the place of where you are at. Do you have adequate resources such as self-compassion and a therapist and a professional, some sort of professional that can support you to navigate those feelings?
Mhm. So a lot of times I ask people what's been the hardest part of their journey, but you've gone through a lot of hard parts. I want to ask you what's been the best part? What has been the effect that you've been most surprised about leaning out, about going away from this very prescribed career path and taking things in a completely different direction and just taking charge of your own health?
I think the value is right here, right? I got to meet you and knowing like these connections, hearing people's story and
Mhm.
truly seeing people. I was just listening to this documentary called Becoming Nobody, and Ram Dass talks about being on different channels, like in our minds, like TV channels. It talks about channel one is more of like focus on the body. So it's January when we're recording this. A lot of people are focused on changing their body. So if you're focused on changing your body, you'll start to observe everyone else's body. The second channel he called this therapy channel. So if we're focused on mental health, well, then we're going to think about everyone's mental health. The third channel he talked about is the spiritual channel, where we're not seeing each other's differences, but we're seeing each other's similarities. And I'm looking at you and I'm seeing the soul that's within that body. And he talks about, like, oh, how did you get into that one? Referring to the body, the soul. And I love that because I'm currently on a spiritual journey and diving into my own beliefs because I faced a lot of fear of death. That was really making me paralyzed in my own house because after I almost died, but no one was there. So I live this life where people see me and I look fine, but I was there with myself when I almost died. And this is this internal conflict I have. And it's causing a lot of internal stress. So I'm like, well, what do I need? I need to allow myself to feel it and also sit with what does death mean for me? Why am I so anxious about this? And I prepare like logistically, and that helps my anxiety, but also in what do I believe is going to happen? Because if we can accept our mortality and what we truly want to believe about what happens, then that can help us live more intentionally. So that to me has been just makes life more meaningful. I no longer feel like I'm numbing my life until I die. It is asking those hard questions. It is sitting with that shame and then realizing that how much the connection was filling that void. I'm like, oh, that's what truly mattered. It's not all the titles. It's not it, actually everything that society says often is pushing us further and further away from what we're craving.
Yes, and the connection with people who get it, I agree. It's such a benefit of going out there and sticking your neck out and doing something different. You really get to meet amazing people. I love that we have connected. And I know that you have on your YouTube channel many other very interesting people that you've interviewed and connected with. Where can people find your work? So talk about your YouTube channel and any other places that you're present online right now.
Yeah, well, the YouTube channel, like you said, it's called A Life True to You. So really helping high achievers to come home to themselves and ask themselves what really matters in their life and how to start living more intentionally today. And it does have many different perspectives because I want people to hear yours. You are on the channel
Yeah.
and just the very different perspectives. I love hearing about people's stories, and people will resonate with other people's stories more than they will mine. So they can be part of that. And if they don't resonate with people's stories and they want to tell theirs, then please let me know. Let's hear your story. And I'm on Facebook and I'm on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to just get a hold of me right now, since who knows where Facebook's going. But LinkedIn will probably be here for a while. So that's a good way to get in touch with me.
Well, Jillian, I've loved chatting with you today, and I wonder if you have any last advice for listeners out there who might be feeling stuck and like they can't live their authentic lives and who maybe want to make a change but don't feel right now like they can.
Yeah, I think the awareness is key, first of all, if you do want to make a change, the inner yearning, and then also partnering with somebody to help you explore which thoughts are true and which thoughts are limiting beliefs or thoughts that are getting in the way of our own selves. So I like to validate what people's obstacles truly are while also helping them to hurdle over any of those self-limiting beliefs and fears that are holding them back.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this conversation today and for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.